Are you from Chicago? Or maybe somewhere in the Midwest like me? Or are you watching from somewhere far away? Maybe the South, maybe the East Coast, maybe even another country entirely. Wherever you are, I want you to pull up a chair and sit with me for a little while, because what I'm about to tell you is something I have never spoken out loud to anyone outside of my family. Not once, not in all these years. But I'm 63 years old now, and I have decided that silence has protected the wrong person for far too long. My name is Maria, and for 11 years I was married to a man I believed with my whole heart was a good man. I want you to understand that before I tell you anything else. I wasn't naive. I wasn't young and foolish. I was 38 years old when I married my husband, Raymond. I had already lived a life before him. I had my daughter from my first relationship, and I had learned plenty of hard lessons about men before Raymond ever walked through the door of my sister's restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon in October and asked me if the chicken and dumplings were as good as they smelled. I told him they were better. He smiled at me with this slow, easy smile, the kind that starts in the eyes before it ever reaches the mouth, and I thought, Lord, this man is going to be trouble. But I meant the good kind of trouble, the kind that makes your heart beat a little faster when the phone rings and you already know who it is. We dated for 2 years before we married. 2 years of Sunday dinners and long phone calls and him showing up at my sister's place with flowers for both of us, because he said any man who wanted to be with me had to first make friends with the people I loved. My daughter was 9 years old when Raymond and I got married. She was the most important person in my world, and he knew that. He treated her gently, carefully. He never tried to replace her father, never pushed himself on her, just made himself steady and present and reliable, the way a good man does. He came to her school plays. He helped her with her science projects. He taught her how to ride a bike in the parking lot behind the church on Saturday mornings. I loved him for that most of all. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of Detroit, a brick house with a big front porch and a yard that needed work but had good bones. Raymond said that was the most important thing, good bones. A house, a marriage, a life, if the bones are good, you can build anything. I believed him. The first 7 years of our marriage were the best years of my adult life. I won't pretend otherwise, even knowing what I know now. Those years were real. Raymond worked at the automotive plant. I kept the books from my sister's restaurant. My daughter grew from a quiet little girl into a bright and funny teenager who made straight A's and wanted to be a nurse. We went to church on Sundays. We had people over for cookouts in the summer. We argued sometimes, the way married people do, about money and little things and whose turn it was to call the plumber, but we never went to bed angry. That was our rule, and Raymond held to it as firmly as I did. So when things started to change, I told myself I was imagining it. You know that feeling, don't you? When something shifts in your house, in your marriage, in the air between two people who have shared a bed and a table for years, and you can feel it the way you can feel a storm coming even before the clouds roll in. That low pressure in your chest, that stillness that isn't peaceful. You know it, but you don't want to name it, because naming it makes it real. For me, it started small. Raymond began coming home later on Fridays. Not every Friday, just some of them. He said it was overtime. Then he started taking phone calls in the backyard, standing out there in the cold in January with the door pulled shut behind him, and when I'd ask him who he was talking to, he'd say it was somebody from work, some problem with a shift schedule. Nothing worth worrying about. He started drinking more. Not stumbling, falling down drinking, but a quiet kind of drinking, a slow glass of whiskey that became 2, and then 3, sitting in the armchair in the living room after dinner with the television on but his eyes somewhere else entirely. I asked him if something was wrong. He said he was tired. He said the plant was stressful. He said he was fine. I chose to believe him because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to look at directly. But then the night started. The first time I woke up and found him standing beside the bed, I thought I was dreaming. It was somewhere around 2 in the morning, and I opened my eyes and there he was, just standing there in the dark, perfectly still, looking down at me. I nearly came out of my skin. I said his name and he blinked and said he'd gotten up to get some water and couldn't sleep and had just come to check on me. I told him he had scared me half to death. He laughed a little and got into bed, and I told myself it was nothing. But it happened again. Not the next night, but a week later. And then again after that. Each time, the same thing. I'd surface from sleep and feel something, some pressure in the room, some sense of being watched, and I'd open my eyes and there he would be, standing, still, looking. And each time he had a different explanation that was really the same explanation. He couldn't sleep. He was restless. He was just checking on me. I started sleeping lighter. I started waking up at the smallest sound. I started lying in the dark after he'd gotten back into bed and staring at the ceiling and asking myself questions I couldn't answer. Was he sleepwalking? Was something medically wrong? Was it something else? Something I couldn't name? I asked my sister about it one afternoon when I came in to go over the books. I didn't tell her everything. Just said that Raymond had been acting strange lately and not sleeping well and standing over me in the middle of the night. She put down her coffee cup and looked at me and said, "Maria, baby, that is not normal." I told her I knew it wasn't entirely normal, but maybe he was just anxious about something and I needed to give him a chance to come to me. She said, "Or you need to start paying attention." I started paying attention. I want to tell you what that means. Truly paying attention. Not just watching, but listening, noticing, cataloging. I started noticing the small things. The way Raymond would stop talking when my daughter walked into the room, not abruptly, not obviously, just a fraction of a second before she appeared, as though he had heard her coming. The way he looked at her sometimes, not the way a stepfather looks at his daughter, not with pride or warmth, but with something calculated, something assessing, like he was measuring her against some standard I couldn't see. I noticed that he had started asking her questions about her friends, her schedule, when she came and went, and I had told myself he was just being more involved, taking an interest the way I'd always hoped he would. But it didn't feel like interest. It felt like inventory. My daughter was 16 by then. She was beautiful and bright, and she had no idea that anything was wrong in our house because I had worked very hard to make sure she didn't. She was focused on school, on her friends, on a boy she liked named Daniel who played trumpet in the school band and was sweet and well-mannered and brought her home by 9 o'clock every time. She was a child living a child's life, and I was her mother, and it was my job to stand between her and anything that wanted to hurt her. I just didn't know yet what that thing was. The night that changed everything was a Thursday in November. It was cold, the way Detroit gets cold in November. That deep bone cold that settles in early and doesn't leave until April. My daughter was at her friend's house studying, and I was supposed to be at my sister's for dinner, but I'd come home early with a headache and taken something for it and gone to lie down while Raymond was watching television downstairs. I fell asleep before 8 o'clock. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up. Late. The house was quiet and dark, and Raymond wasn't in bed beside me. The television wasn't on. I lay there for a moment with that familiar, prickling feeling, that sense of wrongness, and then I heard his voice. He wasn't in the room with me. He was in the hallway, just outside our bedroom door, talking on the phone in a low voice. And because the house was so quiet and the walls in that old brick house were thin, I could hear him clearly. I did not move. I did not breathe. I lay absolutely still in the dark with my eyes open and I listened. "It's going to be like we talked about," he was saying. "After the new year. I told you, she doesn't know anything. She's not going to be a problem." A pause. "I know what I said. I'm telling you it's handled." Another pause. Longer this time. And I could hear the murmur of another voice on the line, though I couldn't make out the words. Then Raymond again. "Look, Darnell, I don't have a choice here. You know, I don't have a choice. I owe you what I owe you, and this is how we settle it. She's 16. She's mature. You said yourself." He stopped, listened. Then, quieter. "Fine. Fine. After Christmas, like we agreed. I'll make sure she's ready." I did not move. I want you to understand what it is to hear something like that and have your entire body go completely cold while your mind races to find some other interpretation, some other meaning, some version of what you just heard that isn't what you know it is. I lay there in the dark and I told myself I had heard wrong. I told myself it was about something else, some debt, some deal, something that had nothing to do with my daughter. I told myself there was an explanation. But I had heard her. He'd said she. He'd said she's 16. He'd said she's mature. And he had said the name Darnell. I knew who Darnell was. Darnell was Raymond's older brother who lived in Memphis, who we saw maybe once a year at family gatherings, who Raymond had always spoken of with a careful sort of neutrality, never quite praising him, never quite criticizing him. I had never liked Darnell. I couldn't have told you exactly why. He was polite enough. He never said anything overtly wrong, but there was something in the way he looked at young women, something in the way his eyes moved that made me want to keep distance between him and my daughter at every family event we'd ever attended. I had done it quietly, the way mothers do, steering and redirecting without ever making a scene. My husband had just agreed to send my daughter to that man to settle a debt. I lay in that bed for the rest of the night, and I did not sleep, and I did not move, and I did not make a single sound. I was not panicking. I want to be clear about that. There are moments in a woman's life when something so terrible happens that the panic doesn't even come, because your body understands instinctively that panic is a luxury you cannot afford. What I felt in those dark hours was not panic, it was clarity. Cold, absolute, unshakable clarity. The kind that strips everything away, all the love and the years and the good memories and the Sunday dinners and the bike lessons in the parking lot behind the church, strips it all away and leaves only one thing standing. My daughter. Raymond came to bed around 3 a.m. I had my eyes closed and my breathing slow and even, and he climbed in beside me and was asleep within 10 minutes, and I lay there listening to him breathe, and I thought about every move I needed to make. I gave myself until morning. When Raymond left for work at 6:30, I got up and I called my sister. I told her I needed her to listen to me without asking questions until I was finished. She said okay. I told her everything I had heard. When I was done, she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "How soon can you get the two of you out of that house?" I said, "How soon can you have a room ready?" She said, "It's already ready. It has always been ready. You come whenever you need to come." That is who my sister is. I want you to know that, because in a story like this, where a man fails in every way a man can fail, there is always a woman somewhere who holds everything together, and for me, that woman was my sister. I spent that day in a state of controlled, methodical purpose. I did not cry. I did not fall apart. I went to my daughter's school and I sat with the guidance counselor, a woman I had known for years, and without telling her everything I told her enough, and she helped me understand what I needed to do and who I needed to call. I went to the bank and I opened a new account in only my name, and I moved the money I had been quietly saving for years, birthday money, Christmas money, the small amounts I'd skimmed from my own paycheck and set aside because some part of me, some deep animal part, had always known that a woman needed to have something that was hers alone. I went to the school and picked up my daughter at 3 o'clock and told her we were going to stay at her aunt's house for a little while because I needed some help with something. She looked at me with those sharp, perceptive eyes of hers and she said, "Mama, what happened?" I said, "I will tell you everything, I promise, but right now I need you to trust me." She said, "I always trust you." I packed 2 bags, one for her, one for me. I packed what mattered. Documents, photographs, her school things, the medicines we needed, the few pieces of jewelry that had been my mother's. I left the furniture and the dishes and the curtains and the 11 years of accumulated life. I left his chair and his whiskey glasses and the quilt his mother had made that hung on the wall in the hallway. I left all of it, and I closed the door behind me, and I drove to my sister's house, and I did not look back. Raymond called that evening. I didn't answer. He called again and again, and then he drove to my sister's house and knocked on the door, and my sister went to the door and told him to leave. He stood on the porch and asked to speak to me, and she told him that wasn't going to happen. He said there had been a misunderstanding. There was something I didn't understand about the situation, if she would just let him talk to me. My sister told him she had already spoken to someone at the police department, and if he didn't leave, she was going to make a phone call she was very prepared to make. He left. I will not lie to you and tell you the weeks that followed were easy. They were not. They were some of the hardest weeks of my life. My daughter cried when I finally told her the truth. Not the most graphic version of it, but enough. She cried and then she went very quiet in that way she has, that deep, still way, and she said, "He was going to do that? He was really going to do that?" And I said yes. And she said, "And you stopped him?" And I said yes. And she reached across the kitchen table at my sister's house and took my hand and held it for a long time without saying anything more. We reported what I had heard to the authorities. It was not a simple process. I want you to understand that. Because so many people think you just go to the police and tell them something and justice happens quickly and cleanly, it does not always work that way. There were interviews and statements and people who asked me to repeat myself and explain myself, and there were moments when I felt like I was the one being put on trial for listening in a hallway in my own house. But I held to what I knew. I held to what I had heard, word for word, because I had spent all those dark hours engraving it into my memory so perfectly that nothing could shake it loose. What the investigation turned up went beyond what I had heard in that hallway. Raymond's debt to his brother was not a recent thing. It had been building for years, accrued through gambling and loans, and money borrowed and never repaid. Darnell had his own history, a history that the people in Memphis who knew him were well acquainted with, and when detectives began making calls, that history began to surface. Raymond had not acted alone in whatever he had been planning, and the full shape of it was worse than what I had heard. But I will tell you this, my daughter never set foot anywhere near Darnell. Not ever. Not one single time. Because I woke up in a dark room and I listened and I chose my daughter over everything else, and that choice was the right one, and I would make it again every single day for the rest of my life. Raymond lost everything. His job, eventually. His freedom, for a period of time. The house on the south side of Detroit with the good bones and the front porch and the yard that had finally started to look the way we'd always meant it to. He lost it all. And I will not pretend that didn't hurt some part of me, some old grieving part that remembered the man he had seemed to be. But I had a daughter to raise, and I did not have the time or the energy to mourn a man who had never truly existed. I want to tell you about the 6 months after we left, because this is the part that nobody tells you, the part that comes after the crisis. When the adrenaline is gone and the dust begins to settle, and you have to figure out how to actually build something new from what's left. My sister gave us a room and she gave us time and she never once made us feel like a burden, but I was not a woman who intended to rely on anyone else for long. I had spent my whole life building my own things. I was not going to stop now. I found work. It took 2 months, but I found it. Bookkeeping for a medical office group, 3 doctors' practices that shared an accounting system and needed someone who knew what she was doing. I knew what I was doing. I had been keeping books for my sister's restaurant for years, and I sat down in that interview and I laid out my experience and my skills, and I told them exactly what I could offer, and they hired me before I walked out the door. The salary was more than I had made before. I want you to know that. Sometimes the door that closes behind you leads to a hallway that takes you somewhere better than where you started. By the following spring, my daughter and I had a small apartment of our own, 2 bedrooms, a little balcony where I planted tomatoes in pots, a kitchen with good light. It was nothing like the brick house. It was better, because every single thing in it was ours, genuinely ours, with no shadow of something hidden in the walls. My daughter graduated high school the next year at the top of her class. She applied to 3 nursing programs and was accepted to all 3. She chose the one in Ann Arbor because she said she wanted to be close enough to come home for Sunday dinners, but far enough to learn who she was on her own. I drove her to campus in September with her bedding and her boxes and her mother's stubborn, ferocious love packed in around everything else, and when I said goodbye at the door of her dormitory, she hugged me for a long time and whispered in my ear, "Thank you for always choosing me, Mama." I held on to those words for the drive home and for a long time after. She is a nurse now. A good one, the kind her patients remember and ask for by name. She has a good man in her life, the sort of man who looks at her the way a man should look at the woman he loves, like she is the most interesting person in every room she walks into. She is happy. She is safe. That is everything I ever wanted for her. That is the only thing that ever truly mattered. I am telling you this story not because I want your pity. I have never wanted anyone's pity. I am telling you this story because I know that somewhere out there, maybe watching this right now, there is a woman lying in a dark room at 2 a.m. with that prickling feeling, that low pressure in her chest, that sense of wrongness she doesn't know what to do with yet. And I want her to know that her instincts are not crazy. I want her to know that the feeling is real and the danger is real, and she has more strength inside her than she has ever been asked to use. But if the moment comes when she needs it, it will be there. It will rise up in her like something ancient and unbreakable, and it will carry her through. Pay attention to your instincts. Pay attention to the small things that don't add up. Pay attention to the way someone looks at your child, the way the air in a room changes, the way a conversation stops a half second before you appear. You are not imagining it. You are not being dramatic. You are a mother, and something in you was built for exactly this, for standing in the gap between your child and whatever is coming for them. Don't let anyone tell you that love requires you to look away. I am 63 years old, and I am sitting on the balcony of my apartment with my tomatoes coming in red and fat, and my daughter called me this morning just to talk, and my sister is coming for dinner on Sunday, and my life is quieter and smaller and more ordinary than the one I thought I was building in that brick house on the south side of Detroit. But it is mine. Every single piece of it is mine, and no one in it has a secret so terrible that I would need to lie awake in the dark and listen for it. That is what I chose. That is what I built, and I would do it again, every single time, without one moment of hesitation. If my story touched something in your heart today, I want to hear from you. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever had a moment where something in you just knew, before your mind could catch up to it, that you needed to move. Tell me your story, because your story matters, and you are not alone, and neither am I. And if you are new here, to Mariah's Stories, welcome. Pull up that chair a little closer. I have more to tell you.